Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this video. So today we are going to talk about solving polynomial equations that have already been factored for us. But before we begin this lesson, we need to start talking about the zero product property. And the zero product property says that if you have real numbers A and B, and if A and B, so if A times B is equal to 0, then A is equal to 0 or B has to be equal to 0. Well, this is really important for us when we're talking about solving polynomials, especially when they've been factored. So we're going to use this today. But one more thing I need to talk about is what we call roots of a polynomial. And what roots are is basically a solution. It is where the polynomial, when graphed, is going to cross the x-axis. So our root of a polynomial would be where the polynomial is going to cross the x-axis. Okay, so with those two things said, let's dive right on into the lesson. And so we're going to use the zero product properties to solve polynomials. Our very first one that we're going to talk about today is let's look at the polynomial that's been factored into x minus 4 and x plus 2. And that's going to be set equal to 0. Okay, so we're going to use a zero product property that says if you have real numbers A and real numbers B and they are multiplied together, you can set them both equal to 0. So what we do with this equation is we take x minus 4 equals 0 and x plus 2 equals 0. And then you solve these two one-step equations. In this one over here, we're going to add 4 to both sides. And so x is equal to 4. And then over here, we're going to subtract 2 from both sides. And so x is equal to negative 2. So our roots for this polynomial are 4 and negative 2. Okay, everybody good? Anybody have any questions? Good, because I can't see your hands. So let's look at one more. Let's look at 3. Let's do this one, 3x plus 2 times x minus 4 equals to 0. And we're going to find the roots of this one. Okay, so we do the same thing. We're going to set both of these equal to 0. So 3x plus 2 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals 0. So we'll solve this two-step equation. We'll divide both sides by 3. And so x is equal to negative 2/3. And then over here, we're going to add 4 to both sides. And so over here, the second root is 4. So our roots are x equals negative 2/3 and x equals 4. Okay, so that's how simple this is when they're already factored. So you just set both of them equal to 0 and you solve the equation. Okay, well, now what happens if they are not factored? So we're going to actually just factor regular binomials where we're going to take out the greatest common factor. So let's look at this problem. So let's look at 12x plus 42y, and we want to factor this, okay? So here's what I do. I go ahead and I'm going to make a set of parentheses below my binomial, and I ask myself, what is the greatest common factor that I can take out of 12 and 42? Now, I'm going to pause for a second, and so you can think about that. What is the greatest common factor I can take out of 12 and 42? So I know that 6 is a multiple or a factor of both of these numbers. So I'm going to take that 6 out of each one of these. Well, 12x divided by 6 gives me 2x. I bring down my same sign, and 6 divides into 42y, 7y times. Okay? And this should look like a distributive property problem for you. So you can actually, in order to check your answer, you can go 6 times 2x gives you 12x. And then 6 times 7y gives you 42y. So I know that I've factored it correctly. So let's look at another problem. We're going to go 4x to the fourth power plus 24x cubed. We're going to do the same thing. Go ahead and make your set of parentheses. I'm going to go ahead and bring down my sign. Now look at this problem. This problem has x's in both of them, so we're going to have to deal with that as well. Well, let's look at our coefficients. 4 and 24 both have factors of 4, so I'm going to take that out. We also have x cubed and x to the fourth power here. So we can only take out our smallest variable. So I can take I can take my x cube out, okay? Everybody good? So now I'm going to do this division. 4x cubed divided into 4x to the fourth leaves me with 1x. 4x cubed into 24x cubed leaves me with 6. And there is your factored form. Now, let's look at these two problems, and we can actually solve these as well now that they're factored, okay? So I'm going to take that second equation, and I'm going to use it. I'm going to use this one here to go ahead and solve for that. So I'm going to go 4x cubed equals 0, and I'm also going to go x plus 6 is equal to 0 as well, okay? So I'm going to divide both sides by 4, okay? And so x cubed equals 0. And if I take the cube root of both sides, x is going to equal 0, okay? And then I subtract 6 from both sides on this one, and so x is equal to negative 6. So your roots for this one are x equals 0 and x equals negative 6, okay? Now, something that we're going to talk about that really important is called the vertical motion model. We have gravity on Earth, and every time we throw something, it's going to land on the ground, okay? Well, we have a formula that we use that's a polynomial that it allows us to figure out different parts of this problem. So this is a formula that you need to memorize. So we're going to talk about this formula as h equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s. Now, let's talk about all the variables. Now, the h is going to be your height, okay, your ending height. Your t is going to be your time in seconds. And your v is your initial velocity. Okay, it is your initial vertical velocity. And your s is your initial height. Okay, so with everything defined, let's do a problem together. I always like to use this one. It's an armadillo for those of you who live in Florida like we do. We have a lot of armadillo down here, and if you've ever scared an armadillo, they can jump straight up in the air. So a startled armadillo jumps straight into the air with an initial vertical velocity of 14 feet per second. After how many seconds does it land on the ground? So what we're going to do is put in some numbers that we know. Well, let's start off with h equals negative 16t squared plus vt plus s, okay? So let's fill in everything we know. Well, we want to find out when it's going to land back on the ground. So our final height, or ending height, is going to be 0, okay? We don't know the time because that's what we're going to solve for. We know that the vertical velocity for this is 14 feet per second. So we're going to put that. And our armadillo started on the ground, which means it started at 0, okay? Now, because this is 0, I don't need this right now. So I'm going to pull that out, okay? So we need to figure out how much time it took the armadillo to land back on the ground once it was startled, okay? So now I can't solve this right now without factoring it first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to factor this. So I'm going to ask myself, what can I take out of this equation to make it work? So let's go ahead and bring down my plus sign, okay? I'm going to ask myself, what is the greatest common factor that I have between 16t squared and 14t? Well, the only factor that our two coefficients have in common is 2. So I can take a 2 out. And I have a t in both of these. So my lowest t is t to the first power, so I can take t out. So now I'm going to divide. 2t divides into negative 16t squared, negative 8t times. 2t divides into 14t, 7t times. Okay? Everybody good so far? Now I'm going to use the 0 product property, and I'm going to set both of these equal to 0. So I get 2t equals 0, or negative 8t plus 7 equals 0. Okay? So I'm going to solve both of these. Divide by 2, t equals 0. Or I'm going to solve this one. I'm going to subtract 7 from both sides. Negative 8t equals negative 7. And then I'm going to divide both sides by 8, negative 8. And so t equals positive 7/8, because a negative divided by a negative is a positive. Now we have a problem. It's asking us after how long does it take it to land on the ground? Well, I can eliminate this answer here. Because at 0 seconds, we're asking, we know that it's going to take some time. So I can eliminate this answer. And so we're only left with one answer. So it takes the armadillo 7/8 of a second to land on the ground. So I'm hoping that you guys have found this to be interesting and that it will be informative and it will be able to help you. I hope you guys have a great day and take care.